Good evening, dear Consul General, Britta Wagener, honored guests, dear friends. Welcome here in the Goethe-Institut New York to this year's presentation of the Helen and Wolff Prize and the Gutekunst Prize for Literary Translation. So we call this the Translation Award ceremony. I want to thank everybody who has made this event possible, starting with the German Foreign Office in Berlin, the donor of the Helen and Wolff Prize, then the Gutekunst Estate and the Friends of Goethe, New York, both donors of the Gutekunst Prize. I want to thank the two juries and especially the laudators. I'm very happy that both prize winners are here with us tonight, Daniel Bowles and Laura Caton. And I have the special pleasure to welcome as our guest Christian Kracht, the author of the novel, among others, Imperium, which has been translated so excellently by Daniel Bowles. And we have Charlotte Greve, New York-based and German-born alto saxophonist for the musical part. So let us start with a Gutekunst Prize. As always, I'm tempted to say, Tess Lewis, translator and member of the jury, will be our laudator. Thank you very much and have a great evening.
Good evening, and thank you for coming. We're gathered here this evening to celebrate translation and translators, both established and emerging. And there is indeed much to celebrate. First and foremost, of course, tonight's honorees, Laura Caton and Daniel Bowles, the men and women in whose honor these prizes were founded, Helen and Wolff and Friedrich and Grace Gutekunst, and as well as our hosts, the Goethe-Institut. This year's Gutekunst Prize contenders were given a passage to translate from Drohnenland, Drone State, Tom Hillenbrand's prize-winning crime novel set in a futuristic surveillance state. The year is 2045, and the European Union has become the biggest of big brothers, exerting ruthless and brutal jurisdiction over all the member states. In a world where everything is seen, analyzed, and recorded, how hard can it be to find a criminal? Surprisingly hard, it turns out, once it becomes clear to Europol Chief Commissioner Inspector Art von Westerhusen that the data trail has been tampered with. And how hard can it be to translate Hillenbrand's prose? Also surprisingly hard, given its undercurrents of hard-bitten cynicism, brisk dialogue, and a multitude of ingenious technological gadgets. There were almost 36 entries this year, many of them quite impressive indeed, but one stood out clearly from the rest for its inventiveness, flexibility, and flair. It's my great pleasure, on behalf of the jury, to congratulate Laura Caton for rising to the challenge of Tom Hillenbrand's prose with such élan. Her resourceful, flexible, and punchy translation brings the melancholy Inspector von Westerhusen to life. In her hands, high-tech devices like media screens, the mirror space, live replications, cadastre drones, and orthomosaics fit smoothly into the narrative flow. Laura's intuitive feel for language is clear from her skill in capturing the book's slightly menacing, unsettling atmosphere with immediacy. One of the comments made in our jury deliberations was that Laura's translation, quote, finds the most creative solutions, gets the text, and reads most grippingly. This is no mean feat. Hillenbrand's deceptively simple prose, when translated too literally, quickly becomes stilted. She consistently avoided that trap, keeping her prose fresh and energetic. Laura, we're delighted to award you the 2016 Goethe-Kunst Prize and wish you the best of luck and many rewarding years of translating.
Good evening. I'm honored to be this year's recipient of the Gutekunst Prize. Working with this text was my first formal foray into translation, after dabbling in translation as a student in undergraduate and graduate seminars. I intend enthusiastically that it will be the first of many such forays. I find the act of translation fulfilling on a personal level in its combination of the creativity of writing and the mathematical satisfaction of solving a puzzle. And I also find translation necessary on a cultural level. I work in nonprofit theater, which lives and breathes the conviction that dialogue, whether between two individuals or between two systems of belief, is the best way to fully access the truth of a story. Similarly, translation brings two languages into dialogue in service of making stories and ideas more accessible. Particularly in a political and social climate where effective attempts at understanding are increasingly difficult to find, even between speakers of the same language, translation is an increasingly crucial tool to find a reciprocal and peaceful way of bringing two points of view to greater understanding. This particular translation was a joy to work on. More than anything else in a novel, I love a good first-person narrator, and I was thrilled to find one in Jonenland, along with a suspenseful plot, a wry sense of humor, and a thoughtful exploration of technology's advancing role in everyday life. I'd like to read a passage from the end of my translation. It finds our intrepid hero coping with the physical and emotional demands of the mirror space, an immersive virtual reality he has entered in the pursuit of clues to crack his case. I check my specs. It's 7:20. I need to hurry if I don't want to be late. I walk up the street, dodging the people coming towards me, which is more difficult than I would have thought. Evasive maneuvers like this usually involve the attention of both parties, but these passersby don't deviate even a millimeter from their set paths. At this hour, there's still a lot going on, relatively speaking, as the second rush hour is in full swing. Overtime workers have finally left their offices by now, and they're in a particular rush. They have to hurry if, after their commutes and family dinners, they still want to spend at least an hour vegetating in front of their media consoles before they pass out from exhaustion. The commuters bear down on me. They can't see me, and anyway, they're much more interested in finding a gap in the end-of-day melee and trying to push through. I only manage to avoid a series of near misses by dodging in every direction. When I'm almost at the hotel, I pause for a moment and consider how I should cross the street. As I stand on the edge of the sidewalk, a taxi stops in front of me. The sliding door opens with a swish and reveals the unoccupied passenger seat inside. Why can the taxi see me? Suddenly, something pushes out of my chest, something round and purple-colored, followed by something green. I stagger back a step and clutch at my upper body. It's a man. He looks Brazilian and has a surgically modified forehead with bulging eyebrows. His hair is dyed purple, and he wears a green designer suit. With a purposeful stride, he walks to the waiting taxi, gets inside, and drives away. I feel sick as a dog. I lean against a nearby wall. Beads of sweat roll down my neck, and my knees are shaking. I try to do meditative breathing, the way we were taught in training for the replications. Breathe in, I recognize white light and positive energy. Breathe out, I release gray light and negative energy. After a while, the nausea vanishes. I notice the texture of the concrete against my palms and the back of my head. Does actual concrete really feel so rough? I shouldn't think too much of it. Even with the help of hypnoremeral and conditioning practice, the human mind can only handle so much. And of course, such blatant violations of deep-rooted laws of nature would trigger stress reflexes. I could probably ask Terry to render the passersby so that they'd sidestep me at the last second. But then I'd be in just another run-of-the-mill feed and not in a perfect image of reality. No, I'd better learn to be a good ghost and dodge them instead. And that brings me back to the problem of how I should cross the street. Cutting across the lanes of traffic like I normally do isn't a good idea. Just like the pedestrians, the drivers can't see me. Although none of the vehicles Terry's sending down the avenue can run me over, I still walk to the next intersection and wait until traffic stops there at the next red light. Then I cross the street and enter the hotel through a revolving door. In the lobby, I'm greeted by a statue of the eponymous Lotte. At her feet kneels a lovesick Werther holding a bouquet of roses. I ignore the pair of lovebirds and head straight for the bank of elevators. To emphasize that its guests are treated in the tradition of the old grand hotels, the Hotel Lotte has assigned a boy in a gold-trimmed uniform to stand in front of the elevators and relieve its guests from having to input the floor selection themselves. I have a soft spot for such old-fashioned things, but this old-fashioned thing poses a problem for me. For a moment, I stare helplessly at the elevator boy as he waits for customers behind his podium. Then something flashes on my specs. Elevator 2, please. Thank you.
The Helen and Kurt Wolff Prize 2016. And we'll start, as usual, with the jury statement read by Shelley Frisch, who has been the chair of the jury this year. Shelley, the floor is yours. Thanks so much.
This will be very brief before I hand over the more elaborate statement of our jury deliberations to Ross Benjamin. I'd like first to add my congratulations to Laura Caton for winning the 2016 Gutekunst Prize. As a double dipper who served on both of tonight's juries, I'm doubly pleased at the outcomes. And now on to part 2 of tonight's festivities. On behalf of this year's jury, which comprises Karin Möller, sitting over there, Susan Harris, Ross Benjamin, and John Hargraves, who couldn't be here this evening, and myself, I would like to thank the Goethe-Institut for hosting the coveted Helen and Kurt Wolff Translators' Prize for the finest German to English translation to be published in the United States this year. The Wolff Prize brings a heightened awareness to distinguished works of literature that have made their way across the Atlantic to delight in English language readership, provide a much-needed cultural bridge from the old world to the new, and shine a light on the translation profession as a whole. In the case of the Wolff Prize, we jurors do have access to the source texts, being that they're all in German, but the same sense of wonder at inspired solutions to thorny problems, and at bottom, all texts firmly resist translation, applies when the Wolff jurors read well-translated texts. We have lively discussions about the respective virtues of different submissions, but when a translation truly stands out, as Daniel Bowles' translation of Imperium did, the members of the juries all know it when they see it. We are honored to have the author of the original German novel, Christian Kracht, here with us tonight, and I imagine he'll be giving a couple of remarks as well. I hope he has shared in our pleasure in rereading his novel in Daniel Bowles' new linguistic garb. I'll now turn over the podium to co-juror Ross Benjamin, who will provide an overview of the reasons we selected Daniel Bowles' translation of Christian Kracht's Imperium, a novel that draws on the fact-is-stranger-than-fiction story of a radical vegetarian nudist who sets out to found a South Seas colony based on worship of the sun and coconuts. And this translation will receive wonderfully quirky and text and translation to receive this year's Helen and Kurt Wolff Translators' Prize. Congratulations, Daniel Bowles.
You have been announced already. Ross Benjamin, member of the jury, will be the laudator.
Hello. Has this been the same water for all of the speakers? It is my privilege to explain to you this evening why the jury has awarded this year's Helen and Kurt Wolff Translators' Prize to Daniel Bowles for his rendering of Swiss novelist, may I call you that? Swiss novelist Christian Kracht's Imperium. Before I praise some of the more specific technical and aesthetic achievements of the translation, I would like to stress the significance of the translator's decision to apply his talents to this particular novel. Thanks to Daniel Bowles, Imperium is the first of Christian Kracht's works to appear in English. But Kracht's enduring importance in German language letters began with his 1995 debut, Vaterland, widely regarded as a founding novel of German pop literature. As influential as Vaterland was, Kracht neither embraced the pop literature category nor constrained himself to fit within it. Rather, he went on to publish several celebrated novels that cannot be easily pinned down. Imperium is the most recent and far-reaching example of Kracht's singular brilliance and his ongoing impact on the German-speaking and wider literary world. Imperium is the story of a German radical vegetarian nudist, I think we had the same phraseology there, named August Engelhardt, who at the dawn of the 20th century purchases an island of what was then the Bismarck Archipelago in German New Guinea, where he attempts to establish a colony based on worship of the sun and coconuts. Kracht turns the historical details of Engelhardt's utopian fanaticism, its cultural roots, and its ultimately malignant consequences into an allegory of the German madness to come. In its play with literary models from 19th century Anglo-American novels of imperial adventure, Conrad, Stevenson, Melville, to the writing of Thomas Mann, Imperium brims with intertextual echoes and sly literary historical references. The novel's prose is self-consciously ornate, mannered, and anachronistic, a pastiche of a literary heritage that Kracht adopts in order to expose its dubiousness. Daniel Bowles's ability to do justice to the elusive density and unsettling slippery tone of the original is a key strength of his translation. He consistently and creatively uses an exaggeratedly antiquated, over-elaborate diction to capture the comic archness of Kracht's style. Here's a taste of that. After having adjudged all other foodstuffs unclean by process of elimination, Engelhardt had abruptly stumbled upon the fruit of the coconut palm. Bowles also picks up on and brings out subtly shifting inflections of the narrative voice, as writers of the era depicted in the novel are evoked and impersonated. At one point, for example, Engelhardt has a pivotal and ill-fated encounter with an unnamed character, spoiler alert, nonetheless recognizable as Thomas Mann. Mann, known only as the editor, is walking with his fiancée on a beach when he catches sight of Engelhardt sunbathing naked and reports him to the authorities. Here, Kracht's sentences take on even more than elsewhere Mann's cadences, while at the same time deploying motifs from his life and work. To make this perceptible in the English version is no small challenge, but Bowles impressively succeeds. As you can hear in this single sentence, maybe you can hear for a second. As you can hear in this single sentence, in which Bowles mimics Kracht, mimicking Mann in long-windedness, syntactic complexity, and ironic detachment. Here comes the sentence. With a mild lack of enthusiasm, the editor's gaze tracks left, out through the darkening pane of train glass, which grows more and more mirror-like by the minute, onto the fading East Prussian plain. And he suddenly becomes aware of the almost boyishly slender shoulders of the naked young man lying on the beach yesterday. And he recognizes at this moment the actual reason he lodged a complaint, and that his whole future life will be, must be, covered over in painful self-deception, the immensity of which will discolor everything until his dying day, the still unborn children, the work, for several novels are ripening within him, the still amused relationship to the ideal of his own bourgeois sensibility, and the now nascent revulsion at those hands there, folded in elegant calm on the dining car table, of his patiently smiling fiancée, who in turn will persist in decades of ignorance, though her propensity to behave and dress with a certain unwomanliness might have given the young girl, perhaps even now at the outset of their relationship, an indication vis-à-vis the actual proclivities of her betrothed. But it's not only literary figures who haunt Imperium, for the narrator is telling the story with foreknowledge of the horrors of the first half of the 20th century. Here's a quote to that effect from the book. Thus, as a stand-in, the tale of but a single German will now be told, of a romantic who was, as are so many of this species, a thwarted artist. And if at times, in the course of things, parallels arise with a later German romantic and vegetarian, who perhaps ought to have remained at his easel, then this is entirely intentional and naturally, due pardon, consistent in nuce. At the moment, the latter is still just a pimply, cranky lad who gets innumerable smacks from his father. Just wait and see, though. He grows and grows. In this passage, in which the highly wrought style becomes not only satirical, but also ominous and disturbing, Bowles displays his mastery of a text that is operating on more than one tonal register at once. Similarly, in a scene set in Munich, Bowles crafts English prose that skillfully and powerfully conveys these multiple registers of the original. Quote, "The Feldherrnhalle, that Florentine parody off yonder, scarcely dignified by a glance, stands admonishingly, indeed almost slyly, in Munich's spectral summer light. In just a few short years, the time for it to play a leading part in the great theater of darkness will finally come. Flags with the Hindu sun cross will festoon it impressively. And then, climbing the 3 or 4 steps to the stage, a squat vegetarian, an absurd black toothbrush mustache under his nose, will, oh, let's just wait for it to commence somberly, in Aeolian Minor, that great German death symphony. It might be comical to watch, were unimaginable cruelty not to ensue. Bones, excreta, smoke. At such moments in the novel, and in several episodes depicting virulent anti-Semitism and colonialist racism, Kracht unmasks a grotesque underside of the literary pretensions he is parodying. Not only the sheer virtuosity of Kracht's linguistic performance, but also the many tensions and contradictions embedded in the language of this novel demand a translator of extraordinary sensitivity and rare talent, and we are fortunate that Bowles was more than equal to the task. The jury is delighted to award the 2016 Helen and Court Wolff Translators Prize to Daniel Bowles for opening new literary horizons to English-speaking readers with his outstanding translation of Christian Kracht's Imperium.
Thank you so much, Ross. I think it is a rare event in the history of the Helen and Kurt Wolff Prize, in the 21-year-old history of this prize, that the author has been present. And sometimes it's really difficult to have the author in persona. Take last year's prize with the German-Swiss Dadaist Hugo Ball. A book of his was translated, became the award, and Hugo Ball, the book is from the 1910s or so, and he died not that much later. So sometimes the author is not around, maybe not even alive. But in this case, the author is alive and around, and this is a major reason to be happy. And Daniel let us know when I spoke with him on the phone that you live in Los Angeles right now, and then we spoke, and you said you would like to come, and we said, yes, please come, and this is such a rare opportunity that we have the author at a prize presentation. So Christian Kracht, great that you could come, and the floor is yours for whatever you want to say.
Thank you very much. Dear guests, good evening. Wow, Ross, when Danny and I first met, we both insisted on eating oysters, and something which we have done ever since. And we try to wear a tie when we see each other. And Danny will wear one of his wonderful bow ties, and we're emulating each other as if we're almost morphing into one another, adopting each other's verbal idiosyncrasies and tics, even. He'll forgive me now for saying this, but I always feel he's the original and I'm the copy. And this is quite simply because he's a genius. The first of the gifts to perish in a foreign tongue is humor, writes Virginia Woolf. And this is especially true of the German language, where there is very little room for anyway, is translated into English. German can be rather vexing to translate into English. Writers and thinkers as wonderful and funny as Thomas Mann and Martin Heidegger become tedious, flat, and limpid when that diminutive, stiff, nuancenlos, extraordinarily precise, yet long-winded language is squeezed into the fat, rich, expansive, delightfully nuanced and malleable English language. What Daniel Bowles achieves with his translations is no less than creating a certain Proto-Germanic English, an English that sounds slightly off, slightly too Teutonic, because he makes the judicious decision to retain the impression of foreignness for the reader. What he does is to transmit this impression of foreignness by incorporating the foreign ingredients into the target language, or in translation theory parlance, to foreignize the target language. Walter Benjamin, in his marvelous essay, The Task of the Translator, says that the basic error of the translator is that he tends to preserve the state in which his own language happens to be, instead of allowing his own language to be powerfully affected by the foreign tongue. He should, says Benjamin, expand and deepen his language by means of foreign language. Anyhow, this only seemingly disruptive effect of translation, when deployed by a wise translator, can infuse the target language with richness imbued with foreign flavor. Indeed, I feel it is absolutely necessary for the translator to betray the original, as conveyed in the Italian word for her profession, traduttore, which is of course almost the same as traditore, traitor. I feel incredibly blessed. Not only have I found in Danny a fantastic translator, but a very good friend. Thank you, Danny, very, very much, and congratulations on receiving this award.
And now, Britta Wagener, Consul General of the Federal Republic of Germany, will award this year's Helen and Kurt Wolff Prize to Daniel Bowles.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor and at the same time a great pleasure to present this year's Helen and Kurt Wolff Prize for Outstanding Translation to you, Daniel Bowles. You have introduced Christian Krach's Imperium to the English-speaking audience with a very sensitive and skillful translation. Without people like you, literature would remain contained within an author's culture. But with the help of skilled translators, it can transcend boundaries and become a vital part of a mutual understanding. Literature from foreign countries presents profound insight into the psyche of peoples and helps to build respect and tolerance in the best case, which are so critical in today's globalized world. By presenting the Helen and Kurt Wolff Prize, we readers are able to honor your commitment and creativity. I'm also deeply grateful to the late Helen and Kurt Wolff, whose publishing house, Pantheon Books, now part of Random House, has been critical in introducing German and European literature to the United States. And last but not least, I'm very grateful to the Goethe-Institut, who administers the prize with a lot of effort and dedication. So now, Daniel Bowles, I herewith present you the 2016 Helen and Kurt Wolff Prize. So should I read the document? Oh. And this at least will be in German. Der Bundesminister des Auswärtigen verleiht hiermit den Helen- und Kurt-Wolff-Preis 2016 der Bundesrepublik Deutschland an Herrn Daniel Bowles für seine herausragende Übersetzung des deutschsprachigen literarischen Werkes von Christian Kracht, Imperium, in die englische Sprache. Englischer Titel: Imperium, a Fiction of the South Seas. New York im Juni 2016, der Bundesminister des Auswärtigen Steinmeier. Herzlichen Glückwunsch. Ich lasse das jetzt hier, tue das da wieder rein. Und da ist dann noch mehr Wichtiges drin. Ja, ja nochmal. Ja, das gehört alles dazu. Ja, wunderbar. Vielen Dank.
I suppose it's not a very good thing when a translator is at a loss for words. But it does occur to me that I must issue a correction to one of my literary heroes, Thomas Bernhard, who said that receiving a prize is a horrible thing. It's really quite wonderful. All the more so for two reasons. One, in particular with this prize, because it's a prize for translation given by translators, by people who are invested in the field, who know how important it is for literature and for literary culture. And I could not be more honored to have received it from such wonderful translators themselves, and to be really so gratified for this. So thank you. Two, also, because it feels almost embarrassing to receive a prize for a work that was so much fun to do. Working together with Christian and with the publisher was a wonderful experience. And to that end, I would like to, if I may, if you will indulge me, read my very favorite passage from the novel, which is the 12th chapter. We've heard a bit already about August Engelhardt. At this point in the novel, toward the end, Engelhardt's single disciple, Max Lützow, has abandoned him and his project, and in one of the many strokes of irony in the novel, meets the woman who, I think I'm having the same, there we go, meets the woman who had insidiously loaned Engelhardt all of the money with which he indebts himself on this island, and they fall in love. But there is, of course, as so many instances in this novel, tragedy that awaits him. In the evening, Lützow sits somewhat off to the side on the grassy knoll next to the governor's residence. Chains of pretty Chinese lanterns are hanging between the tops of the palms. Fireflies are rising from the bushes dancing. A swarm of thousands upon thousands of bats flies soundlessly inland to spend the night, sleeping deep in the jungle. The sun has already set, but off behind the volcano, the distant glow of gently fading day can still be discerned. Captain Sluter, wearing his white uniform, sits on the veranda smoking, lost in thought. His cruel mission overwhelms him. Beside him, Pandora, whose feet rest in dainty patent leather shoes, where on earth did she get them, and don't quite reach the floor, is devouring a large plate of ginger cookies. On the lawn, the good Dr. Wind sings King Gelida Manina from La Bohème to an amused semicircle of planters. Governor Hall is for some reason not present. Liveried Chinese pass around glasses with sugary punch, and Lützow smokes his first cigarette in a year, which tastes fantastic, a German brand. With his fingertip, he removes a speck of tobacco from his lower lip and is looking out onto the darkening bay, when a woman of a certain age saunters up to him and with casual elegance declares, without introducing herself, that while she is relieved Lützow is now no longer over with that naked man it seems he needed that time away, he looks to have regained his health, the health of his soul. Lützow, whose recollections of what had then seemed to him horrific musical performances in the German club have faded and are now not only coated in the veneer of many months on Cabocon, but in fact have passed completely out of his mind due to the confusing relocation of the capital to Rabaul, he turns to Queen Emma and gazes at a dark, pleasant, open face, whose mouth slightly agape reveals two immaculate rows of teeth, which in turn are separated by the barely visible tip of her tongue. He is struck as if by an electric shock. With his slender hands, he clasps her waist, draws her close to him in a rather manly way, and kisses her with dark red, ecstatic abandon. I'll skip a short passage here. The following day, Lützow and Emma decide not only to leave Rabaul together, but also to get married as quickly as possible. A few suitcases are hurriedly packed, the double doors to Villa Gunantumbo bolted with a large padlock. And while the members of the German club, with the women leading the way, meet for a kind of spontaneous, extraordinary plenary assembly, the sole aim of which is to heap as much ridicule as possible upon Queen Emma and her musician, to blanket both with the filth of their malevolent ressentiment, the pair walk over to the governor's residence, followed by a throng of black porters, to ask Hall to marry them then and there. Emma is wearing her much-used wedding gown, which hasn't been a pristine white for years now. Hal, who has been quite unhappily in love with Emma for over a decade, though no one would remotely suspect it, has of course already heard about the affair. From time to time, it seems to him as if reality, as tenuous as it already is slipping away from him. Such is the case now as the two stand before him smiling dreamily, and he, a short time ago, still permitting himself pangs of conscience about having ordered a murder, which was perhaps dreadfully cowardly after all, summons to his face a diplomatic, if not to say fake smile, conveys his best wishes to both, and asks Lützow with a wink if he has indeed thought this over well. Lützow, as if he could already see the immediate future, declaims with a handsome grin, yet drunken the singer, not heeding his warning, back into the maelstrom turns now his gaze. A tie is located quickly. Laughing, Hal lends one of his. Yes, in this he is unprincipled and big-hearted, especially as he is so happy that Lützow has evidently landed back in civilization again. No, he does not intend to marry them. An excuse is found just as fast as the tie is lent. He cannot find his pince-nez. They ought to go on without him, the youngsters. Emma is long past 50. Slutter is a captain. After all, he too has the right to officiate. Shoo, down to the jetty on the shore. He will follow presently. Then he'll down a glass of spumante to their health. Better yet, 2 or 3. Ha-ha. And Hall, who has seen Emma marry all too often already, of course does not follow, but observes them both as they coo their way down to the Jeddah, dolefully opens the door to his study. There, behind glass, in a mahogany frame, hangs the ubiquitous reproduction of Böcklin's Isle of the Dead, slams the door behind him with a crash, sits down behind the desk, buries his gubernatorial face in those manly sun-tanned paws, and weeps with a lack of restraint that surprises him most of all. Down on the quay, euphoric, the two ask Captain Slutter to marry them aboard the Jeddah. He clears his throat, scratches at his chin, shifts his weight from one leg to another, coughs, and does agree after all, although he, displeased they ought to note, has no experience whatsoever in the area of wedding ceremonies. The Maori Apirana slips into one of Slutter's no longer quite so fresh white shirts and, mildly amusing this, incorrectly hoists the imperial flag to the jib boom. Then he shakes a bottle of champagne, grinning as always. November has disappeared into the stokehold, Pandora somewhere on shore. Emma chews on a caramel and looks 10, 15 years younger. Lützow himself in his prime, a touch too sure of himself, sparkles with electrical energy. It is quite clear and obvious, he remarks, that he has missed sophistication, the ritual of civilization, the crystal glasses, the creased white trousers, not so much as a thought for Kabakon. Enough of that, it was an experiment, indeed a successful one. He can endure almost a year of asceticism. His various ailments are healed, but now back to Europe, to the old world, whose complex attitudes are indeed quite conducive to locating oneself inside a structure into which one was born. Of what use to anyone is escape if one does not return to apply what has been learned and experienced? Give me your hand, darling, away, far away, to Baden-Baden, Montecatini Terme, Evian-le-Bain. Queen of the islands, we will visit Franz Liszt, Debussy in the summery freshness of France, then Berlin, Budapest, and the golden-hued opera houses of our ancient, ancient continent. Emma whispers her I do. Lützow, of course, does too. Captain Slutter utters a few words he's half invented, half cobbled together. They are now man and wife. A champagne cork flies heavenward with a vehement pop. Apirana, his face tattooed in concentric circles, hilariously wetted by the effervescent wine, fills up the readied glasses, his own, fullest of all, empties his in one gulp, and lured out of the reserved elegance of his people by the lightning-quick effect of the wine on his Maori cerebral cortex, he who has never drunk before, lovingly throws his arms around Lützow, Emma, Slutter. This morning in Rabaul, the old Prince Waldemar arrived as well. She is now anchoring, snow-white, stately, and somewhat peaked, directly next to what might be described as an extremely unattractive Jeddah, whose external appearance has not been particularly enhanced by the storm it sailed through in the Solomon Sea. People look over anyway, of course, at the captain and the bride and groom, wave hello, And Lützow in turn dashes toward the bulwark of the Jeddah in high spirits and full of joyful anticipation of the elegant first-class salon of the Valdemar, for he has really had enough of sand fleas and discussions in the nude, climbs atop it quite recklessly, so as to leap over in a single bound from there onto the Imperial mail ship, all the while balancing 2 full champagne glasses like some comedic head waiter and looking back toward the Jeddah, a witty remark, a burning cigarette dangling from his lips. The sole of his shoe, which his feet are not used to wearing anymore, glances off the slippery outer hull of the Valdemar. He tries to reach the ship's rail, snatching, misses it, and now both legs are pulled upward as if they were each hanging from 2 threads attached to the sky. He performs a salto which here actually deserves its epithet mortale, then plummets headfirst into the harbor basin, into the water between the 2 ships, whose bilges, thanks to an unfortunately coursing wave or current, are drawing ever nearer to one another like 2 iron whales, and he is squashed by them. Not just legs and arms are pulped, but the whole Lützow. After horrified cries, a red-striped life preserver is thrown down from the Prince Valdemar, but it doesn't even make it to the surface of the water. Instead, it gets stuck, futilely jammed between the 2 ships like a chewy bonbon between the tongue and the palate of a disinterested giant. Emma, poised on the Jeddah in a yellowed wedding dress, not only witnesses the incident, but more or less has it imprinted in slow motion onto her retina, image by tumbling image. She sinks down on one knee in shock, as if in sudden prayer. Everything has happened so horribly fast. She raises a little embroidered linen cloth to the place on her upper lip where she has bitten herself. 2 tears well up, 1 each in her left and right eyes. The batiste is marked by a circular red stain. Slütter gently takes hold of her arm, lifting her up. She stands, fending off his hands. No shrieking, no further tears. Apirana's visage is a painted rock. Thank you.
Please welcome, once again, Charlotte Greve on the alto saxophone with improvisations. Charlotte Greve, thank you so much. And thanks to you for being here tonight. And I hope you stay for the reception. The bar is open. So have a great evening. Thanks so much.